Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Brendan O'Donovan, and I'm the head of product marketing here at Cision. I'm joining you today along with my panelists from our home offices or kitchen tables based in Austin, Baltimore, Raleigh, and San Francisco as we navigate this unprecedented social distancing and work from home situation that many of us are in right now. As a heads up, my wife is graciously entertaining my fur children right now and doing her best to keep them quiet, but I do apologize in advance if either decide to make their presence known on today's presentation. Before we get started, though, a few housekeeping items. We plan to make the session as interactive as possible, and we'll be live tweeting this event using the hashtag COVID-19comms, so please join the conversation there. Also, as we go through the webinar today, if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A box to submit the questions. We'll have a short set of introductory content, followed by short questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then finally reserving about the final half of the presentation for live Q&A. We did have an overwhelming response for this. We had nearly 4,000 registrants today, so we're going to do our best to get to all of your questions, but we'll use any of the questions that we don't get to today to follow up in our webinar next week. Invites to come for that, so stay tuned. Also, a recording of today's presentation will be sent to all attendees and be made available on Cision.com following the webinar. So without further ado, we want to introduce our wonderful set of panelists. Starting, we have Jim Prosser from Edelman. Jim is from Edelman, and he's managing the Western region from counseling C-level clients on corporate strategy, narrative, and reputation. We also have Jennifer Donahoe from the Planet Agency, fully integrated advertising and PR agency in Baltimore, Maryland. She leads a team of PR and social media experts developing comprehensive strategies and campaigns with an industry focus on retail, food and beverage, financial institutions, and nonprofits. Jennifer also leads the crisis management team at Planet. Scott is the Director of Public Relations and International Tourism at the Greater Raleigh Convention and Visitors Bureau. He's responsible for the Bureau's public relations efforts, including consumer and trade media relations, as well as influencer marketing, crisis response, issues, and reputation management. He also oversees the international travel trade sales and marketing programs for the Bureau. So before we get started with the questions and answers, I wanted to go ahead and start with a quick view of the media landscape, of what's happening in the world today. So when we start with the timeline on these of the COVID-19, what we're looking at is a long tail of media that started all the way back in December. In December, there was a bunch of unknowns happening and a lot of small stories coming out about the impending crisis, but not a lot of headline news. So what we're looking at here is basically the headlines that were happening around all of this conversation. Now, moving on, you start seeing a little bit more activity when we start getting into, where the World Health Organization starts getting a bit of the identification that there is something novel about this new virus, that this is new. We also have the first cases. You start seeing the spikes when it starts spreading through the United States, Iran, Canada, Nepal, Australia, Malaysia. It all happens very, very quickly. Then the spikes start getting larger as COVID-19 starts getting actually officially named. You move on and you start seeing more news start getting generated as this gets more serious, and you start seeing financial repercussions where markets start to get concerned about the spread of this disease. Facebook cancels their F8 conference. Japan starts closing schools. You're starting to see a lot of headlines on the repercussions across society here. And then finally, we start getting into the last couple of days that we've really been in right now, where the U.S. starts issuing travel bans for about 30 different countries. You also start seeing the spikes go through the roof, where New York City closes all the bars, and San Francisco issues the shelter in place that Jim's dealing with right now. And most workers are sent home at this point in time. If they can work from home, a lot of the municipalities, states, local governments across the world are telling people to work from home, to be safe. And then finally, I know there's a lot of news that still even happened today, but even starting yesterday, the financial repercussions, the worries of the markets, the worries of the impacts of how this is going to make everyone change everyone's lives for the next few weeks start really hitting home. And the governments are starting to react across North America as well. So with that context, I wanted to start the conversation with Jim to talk about some of the findings that Edelman has been working on in their trust studies. So Jim?
Yeah, thank you very much. And first off, I want to acknowledge we're seeing the comments here, and I know that there's some problems with the slides. It sounds like the Cision team is on that to make sure you all can see them. That would be very helpful because I have some slides actually that I want to walk people through. So first off, just thanks again for being here. This is a very important time for communicators to take a lead in their organizations and be not just a partner, but also be a driver. So what I wanted to talk about at the lead here is a bit of research that we at Edelman have done. Some of you might be familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer. So it's a yearly study that we do. It's global in nature. And basically, we look at the level of trust that people around the world have in different institutions, in the media, in companies, and in leaders. And so we just actually issued our 2020 version of the study back in January. But given the magnitude of what we're facing with coronavirus, we wanted to do a new pulse on that. So we just issued some new findings on Monday. I want to briefly touch on, I think, what are the most pertinent ones here. But know that if you want to see the full study, you can go to edelman.com. If you go right to the homepage and click on the COVID-19 banner that's at the top, you'll go to the full research. And I highly recommend everybody spend some time with it because I think there's things to take away for everybody. So first off, if we look at trust broadly here, we did this pulse across 10 countries. We did it from the 6th to the 10th of March. So this isn't up to the moment here, but so there's a bit of a lag, but we can still draw some lessons here. So the first thing I want to talk about is the most relied on sources of information. And what we see here is that the major media organizations are the most trusted entities right now when it comes to being information sources, far more so than the government. And that's government across levels. We'll touch a bit on the government aspect in a little bit here. But just know, despite historic lows in trust in media in general, in this particular context, there's a high degree of trust in them. If we proceed, there we go. I've got the slide now. So if you see major news organizations, national government sources, there's a very large delta there. So it's a 24-point delta between those on an international basis. And then if you look in particular at the US portion, there is a very, very large gap between major news organizations and national government sources. If we go to the next slide. All right. Oh, too far. Back one.
We got to that. There you go.
So if we look at, who's trusted to respond effectively here, you've got a lot of the typical players you would expect. You would expect hospitals and nurses to rank high. You would expect national health authorities to rank high. The most surprising one, I think, and the most salient one for us here, I think, all today, is that my employer, people's employer ranks higher than anything else except for people who are in the immediate health industry and the health area, I should say. If you look at what is below there, you've got NGOs, the government writ large, insurance companies. Trust really is a local phenomenon. People want to believe that the people closest to the metal on the front lines of this thing are the folks who are most informed and in best position to advise them. And you can look at the bottom there. As I said, trust in media to respond effectively is low, but trust in media information is high. If we go to the next slide. So this is another key finding here too, is that people trust their employers to take action. And really high percentages in the US, the UK respond this. Japan's a little lower, but they have a stronger trust level in the government response, which is probably attributable to the fact that Japan has faced a number of pandemics or epidemics in the recent history. If we go to the next slide. So this is another one. I know this popped up in the questions too, so I wanted to flag it here. If you look at the graph in the US and really through throughout most of the geographies that we surveyed, with the exceptions, of course, being Germany and Canada, employees want to hear from their employer at least once a day, if not several times a day. And I know there was a question I think we're going to address later that was specifically to this point. Oversharing and over-communicating, there's really no such thing in this time. As long as you're directing those communications to the right employees at the right time with the right message. So that's a very, very brief update across a bunch of research that we have here. Again, I'd encourage everybody to go download the full report from Edelman.com. It's very long, but you can spend some time with it. And I think there's things that everybody can draw from it, whether you're in corporate comms or brand comms or public affairs. There's something you can bring to your leaders in your companies and in your organizations for everybody. So thank you.
Fabulous, Jim. Really interesting stuff. Wanted to move over to Jennifer. Jennifer, you've been working with a lot of your clients recently. I mean, this is a super hot topic. I'm sure there's a lot of people asking a lot of questions. What are the top things your clients are concerned about today that you're seeing? Jennifer, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, yes. Thank you.
Great. My apologies. It would be helpful if I turned myself off mute. But just to, first and foremost, to echo what Jim was saying, a lot of our clients are first and foremost concerned about communicating with their employees. So maintaining morale, doing the right thing for their employees. We're seeing a lot. So we're working both for internal communications, but external communications too. A lot of employers are concerned, what if one of our employees is diagnosed? First and foremost, the health and safety of that employee, but then all of their employees. And then how does that potentially impact your customers or other people who may have been in contact with that employee as well? We're certainly seeing, for some of our larger food brands, concerns about supply chain disruption. Thankfully, they haven't seen it yet, but there could be kind of this ripple effect where if an employee in a plant contracts the virus, does that impact and kind of go down the road a little bit? Certainly closures and financial impact, but I think what our clients are really shifting to, what I'm really excited about and feel like as a communicator, I get to be part of making hopefully a positive difference in what's going on, is how can we help? What can we do as a business to help those on the front lines, those impacted, maybe those who can't work right now, with financials are tight? Those are some of the things that our clients are really most concerned about. And then kind of shifting from those concerns to kind of some of the advice that certainly my team at Planet is working towards is, if you haven't already, which I'm sure everybody on this call has, but if you haven't already, please unschedule all of your social content and don't schedule anything in the future, because the reality is that this situation is changing hourly, if not more. And something that may even be appropriate now may not be in 3 hours. So certainly take it day by day with your content there. But if there's one important thing I would say, it's share care and concern and be authentic. We're all navigating, trying to figure out how to strike the right tone, because this is a very serious situation. People are very sick, people are dying. So, we have to keep that in mind, while we're also trying to marry communications with brand values and brand voice is very, very important there. And one of the things I'm really challenging all of our clients to do, and we're working through plans, is we have to control the controllables here, and there's a lot outside of our control, but what we really can control here is predicting the next stages of what's going to happen with this virus, right? And that's going to be different based on your client or your company. You might already be completely closed down. Parts of your business might be closed down, but certainly planning for a closure, a partial closure. If an employee is diagnosed, you guys, everybody on the call, do you have a plan, both internally and externally? How are you going to communicate? When are you going to communicate? All of those factors need to certainly go into place. And then if there's a shelter in place order, how could that potentially impact your employees if they're not already home? How could that impact the offer that you have? Is it completely shut down? Can you anticipate that and shift the offer that you have to your customers or stakeholders? And then kind of finally, these plans are so important where we can. But at the end of the day, if, for example, unfortunately, an employee is diagnosed with coronavirus, speed is really going to be very important. Again, first and foremost, for the health and safety of that employee and anyone who came in contact with that employee. But also, what you don't want is you don't want your employees posting on Facebook that happened. You want to kind of set the narrative first and get everything out that you're doing before anybody else does. I think is really important there. And I think as far as some best practices I've seen, it's really that companies are stopping marketing and starting to communicate to help their key audiences, right? So Dollar General is a great example that, the first hour is just open to elderly right now. I think they're doing a wonderful job of shifting some of their business operations to meet those that are in most need. For pulling all of their national ads and then really focusing on payment relief right now. Very smart. They're shifting and helping, not marketing to folks. Some of the other things we're working through with some clients who have the capability are, food donations. Food banks across this country are in absolute desperate need. If you're a food and beverage ban or anything in that realm, do you have a shelf-stable food that you could potentially donate? Or even if you don't, do you have end-of-day food that you can donate? People are in real need there. Financial donations, I think financial relief is a huge one to think through as an offer. And then potentially, again, just shifting your offer to allow for social distancing. Restaurants are doing this really well. Doing delivery, doing free delivery. Again, it's going to be very different. And then, one of the other things we've been talking internally that I'll share is a best practice to consider. There are still certain news stories that are relevant. Some things you need to be held, right? And that makes sense. But if you are doing something really good, you do want to announce that. You do want to be able to help people. A better way to break through that clutter might be to consider doing a video news package. So a lot of TV stations maybe not be allowed to go places or they're just coronavirus coverage. So how could you package up video that would be an easy on-air story for some local TV stations? Just something to consider to break through that clutter when the story is appropriate.
Fabulous advice. Great insights. Thank you, Jennifer. Hey, Scott. So you've got a unique perspective on this. You're kind of right in the middle of one of the most impacted industries right now, which is kind of travel and tourism. What kind of impact are you seeing right now?
Yeah, we are kind of at ground zero in many ways right now in the travel and tourism industry. We're seeing right now, as of today, the latest projections are $809 billion in total economic loss, 4.6 million total employment loss, which is enough. That's 6 times more than we had in 9/11, and that in alone of itself is enough to drop the unemployment rate to a recession level. By May is when we expect, April and May, the rest of the job cuts are going to take place, and that will shed everything down to about 40% employment in the travel industry come the end of May. So these are very desperate times for the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry as a whole. And we're doing everything possible right now to try to save jobs, first and foremost, and to worry about promoting and marketing, secondarily. So I think what you're seeing from people is, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, restaurants that are being forced to close around the country are looking at pushing curbside pickup and delivery and carryout options, even those that have never offered it before. So they're trying to be as creative as they can to keep some cash flow and revenue coming in. Encouraging online gift card sales if you can make them available, or if you already have them available. Encouraging your repeat guests and customers to buy a gift card now that they can use when this whole thing, settles back down, hopefully, months from now. But that revenue now is needed to help you make payroll, and being very forthcoming and direct in how they can help support you now to help save employees. encouraging them to contribute to local fundraising efforts that are set up to help employment efforts, because the restaurants are having to lay off staff as well as the hotels. So how do we get relief efforts to these individuals as well as traditional unemployment? Offering, to Jennifer's point, I do think there still are stories out there to be had. I think if you've got a chef or a restaurant looking at maybe sharing that secret recipe that everybody used to love to come in for to eat, maybe here's your moment to give up that special mac and cheese sauce recipe you have, and share that for people to encourage them to make it home. It's a way to encourage brand loyalty and keep your customers engaged. If you had a spa, here's an opportunity to talk about some wellness opportunities. What are some at-home elixirs or treatments you can give yourself to help with relaxation and help boost immunity? I think those types of things you can do to not only increase your customer engagement are also opportunities for some media exposure right now in our landscape, because obviously we're not talking about restaurant openings and hearing chef profiles, that kind of thing. And this is a different type of media marketplace for the travel and tourism industry. And then turning into advocates, whether you're a DMO like myself or whether you're a restaurant or a hotel, we all have to be advocating right now to our elected officials at a state and federal level that we need relief efforts and we need relief packages put into place, immediately, because we're about to send so many people just from our industry alone on the unemployment line. And it's a very, very scary proposition to have.
Yeah, it's good. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say it's quite. I mean, it is really the front lines right there. I mean, do you think this changes the future of the way that conferences and travel and everything happens? The near term and then long term too.
Yeah, it's a great question. I really don't. In the long term, this crisis is going to lead to recovery. And we know, historically speaking, that the travel and tourism industry will rebound and will rebound fast as well. If you think about it, when this does settle down, there's going to be so much pent-up demand for travel, for people being stuck in their houses, for weeks, if not months on end. So if you look back at past opportunities like this, there's going to be an immediate spike and rush, in demand. And I think that in the end, you're not going to see a change overall to the industry. One area that I think you are going to see possible changes is when you look at the legal side of it. There's always been these clauses in contracts for events and conferences and big, public gatherings called force majeure. It's a term we use often in our industry. And really, the definition of it is unforeseeable circumstances that prevent something from fulfilling a contract. It's very vague. And that is what a lot of event planners, meeting planners, and sporting events right holders are trying to use right now to get out of their contracts and save as much revenue as they can to be able to postpone and continue to have that event. And that's also the same blurred line definition that insurance companies are using to say this is not covered. And I do think that area is an area where legally we might see some changes. I don't know which way we'll go, but I think that that's an area that we'll be keeping an eye on as it pertains to meetings and conventions and that side of our industry, moving forward. And another thing I forgot to mention before was content-wise, there's still opportunities to be had. Everybody right now is gravitating towards natured shots that are going to have a calming effect. So if you can showcase, like a nice soft outdoor shot, or if you're a hotel, if you've got some amazing artwork that is, light and airy and inspirational, anything you can do right now that is still true to your brand, but that has a nice, happy message with it, of support and that, we'll get through this and that we're here for you, can still resonate. So I definitely agree with Jennifer's comment about not scheduling things in advance and making sure that you're staying true to the exact moment and how things are feeling out there. But there are some opportunities to be had, and it's really around how can you help people right now with their mental health to sort of stay happy and keep your brand, top of mind at the same time. And then logistically speaking, conference call lines. Now that we're all working remote and from home, do you have enough bandwidth? How many conference call lines do you have? How many people can be in them? From an interview perspective, are your media spokespeople, be they your CEO or others, well adept and trained on how to do a live feed, whether it's Skype or, a WebEx, and if not, you need to get them trained so that you can make them available for media, because I do agree, and I am seeing on our end that even our local TV stations here in Raleigh are wanting to do Skype interviews because they are not allowed to come out and interact with us face-to-face right now. So those are some of the things that you would have not really thought about before that are having an impact, and here's some ways we can kind of get ahead of it to continue to make ourselves available for media in the right way.
Fabulous. Great advice. So moving on to a couple questions. These had about 100 that came in over the past 24 hours or so. And what we're seeing, I pulled out about 4 or 5 questions that kind of representative of most of the questions that are coming through. And then we're flagging that we're live right now for the live Q&A. Just a reminder, if you are looking to tweet, the hashtag is COVID-19comms. And without, we'll go ahead and move on to the first question. We touched a little bit on this, but one of the questions that is, coming through on the Q&A right now, and one of the questions that was overwhelmingly represented in the email responses were, how do brands continue to do business while not seeming like they're taking advantage of the situation or being predatory? Jimmy, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the first point to make here, and by the way, I want to just say thank you to the people in the Q&A asking questions over text. I've been trying to keep up with you all as much as I can and offer answers. So first of all, it's important that you not be seen as doing something that's taking advantage, but actually not be doing something that is taking advantage of the situation. So this is where we as communicators need to be tight partners with our business partners and tell them if we think something crosses the line. Right. If we determine that it's not crossing a line, but we still worry about the optics, or rather people misperceiving what intents are or what efficacy we're trying to drive here. I think the key is again starting with listening to your community of what they want. And also just knowing what you're good at. And then third of all, coordinating your response and what you're doing. If it's having a if there's a public facing facet to it, coordinating that with local, state, or national authorities, depending on the scope of your business. If there's something, I just would end by saying, trust your gut. Like if it seems like it's predatory, you got to call it out.
Scott, Jennifer, anything to add?
Yeah, I would, definitely agree with Jim. I think a lot of us on this call, if we haven't already, will be in the situation where we might have to talk to leadership and explain respectfully that now is not the right time. Now is not the right time to push that ad. Now is not the right time to sell candles, whatever the case may be. And so be comfortable having that conversation respectfully, but B, at the end of the day, ask yourself, is this, what reasonable people want to hear right now? And if your gut says no, then now is not the time.
Awesome. Moving on, the next one, this one came up quite a bit too. So the general theme was, should I continue selling? The best representative one is, kind of a little bit more detailed, but it comes from Samantha P. in the retail and home goods, which was, how do we communicate promotions or retail sales or things like that during this time without seeming insensitive?
I'll take the first part of that on the B2B service side. It's difficult to answer without knowing exactly the form of service that is being discussed here. And I think that distinction is important. So for instance, if you're a B2B SaaS company, and that's your service, you have a very different posture in COVID-19 than you do if you're a B2B, physical service provider. Like if you're in spaces, if you're in an office, if we're going to people's offices, if you're having direct physical contact with people, obviously this is not the time to be pushing sales right now, both because you're your sales partners or your sales contacts are busy. And second of all, they may not have operations that are open right now. I can tell you, sitting here in San Francisco, somebody trying to sell, in-office solutions is going to have a very hard time. Right. If it is virtual, there could very well be an increased demand for what you're doing. So if you're sitting at Zoom right now as a marketer or as a communicator, I imagine you're very busy. And so it's highly context dependent. It's hard to give generalized advice there other than drawing that distinction between the physical and the digital realm.
I think this still goes a little bit back to shifting. So for example, if you're a bank, you may not necessarily be pushing for folks to sign up, but what can you do? Can you provide some type of loan relief? And you're still, I won't say selling, you're still providing a service, but you're providing what is actually needed right now. So I would encourage you to look at what you offer and how you can change it to help. Which will still draw people in and engage with your brand, but in an authentic way.
Fabulous. Scott, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, there's, when you're trying to promote travel, when there's no travel, what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, our sales teams are dealing with that, looking at trying to bring minis and conventions still in, how do we continue to keep that sales funnel going here, even though right now, we're not allowed to have a gathering, in the area. So I think there are nuances, as everyone mentioned, to find the appropriate way to reach out and kind of keep the pipeline going, but knowing that you're not going to get a commitment maybe right now. So this is, if anything, a time to maybe work on data mining. What can you do to go back and really hone in on your database and your clientele, and do some more research and do some prioritization, maybe. And then the relationships that you have, as mentioned before, I think going back and using them as appropriate to sort of, keep that constant contact and, how are you doing? How's your family doing? If it's genuine, like I believe, Jennifer may have mentioned earlier. So I do think that from a B2B perspective, there's opportunities there. But I think it's also an opportunity to use that downtime to really look at your databases and your clientele and spend it scrubbing and cleaning and learning more and getting ready so that you're even more apt, to hit the ground running right now when you may not be able to make as many sales as you did a few weeks ago.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move to live Q&A here because we've got tons and tons of stuff coming in. So kind of feeding off of that one, this one's actually for you, Scott. It was, how do you handle the PR for travel clients that are directly dealing with the pandemic without sounding, tone deaf or insensitive to writers and consumers?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I hope that some of the things that we mentioned earlier, could pertain to this individual's question, but looking at how can you still engage with your clients and your audience right now, through your social media channels to offer them advice and things that they can use in their home that continue to help you stay top of mind for them. Or if you are a destination for that matter, what can you do to still show that you're still a beautiful, place to visit, and make sure that your messaging, is not, tone deaf at the same time, but just encourage people and keep that inspirational at the same time. I think those are some ways that you can continue to be marketing right now in a mindful way.
Fabulous. Okay, another question. This is more about kind of the employee communication side. It essentially kind of boils down to, with all of the industry in turmoil where, you're going day by day and touch and go, how much is too much? How often how often you communicate? Should you update multiple times a day, once a day, only when you have information? Jim, I think you had some research on that, right?
Yeah. So, what we found is across geographies, the majority of employees, for the most part, want to hear from their employer on a daily basis. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need cold, hard facts always, right? So it doesn't have to be, hey, this is the update on this plant or on this location. It certainly can be those things, but even things like just sharing more resources for parents, for instance. I could just, This has hit Edelman in particular. Our San Francisco office is closed. That's where I work from. And I can tell you, the Edelman Parents Group has become instrumental to the response of, helping parents respond to questions around schooling, around childcare, even planning on, like, what do I do with my kid all day? Help me come up with kind of a curriculum of sorts. So it might be sharing out resources like that are, maybe a little lighter touch and don't have the gravity of, hey, this many employees, are quarantined right now, or we have an employee who's infected. It's looking at the entirety of the employee experience and thinking through, okay, what are the questions? What are the issues? What are the needs that they have that they might not even be voicing at the moment? And not just expressing cold hard facts and resources, but also expressing empathy too. Like people want their employer to feel like there is a sense of shared sacrifice and a shared experience throughout this. I would also add too, I think some of these questions have said, what do we do if someone in our workforce becomes, infected or becomes symptomatic with coronavirus? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. This disease, this virus is coming for everybody. Chances are it will hit, people that everyone on this call knows. Do not plan in an if scenario, plan for when.
Couldn't agree more. Jim, I'm just going to echo some of that. I think it's a good opportunity to do some positive employee engagement. I've been really impressed with my company personally, in a leadership team meeting yesterday. They did, whoever wore the funniest hat got a $100 gift card. We utilize Google services. So we've created, they call them rooms for different clients, but we've also created one for parents who we can just talk about our troubles or joke about them. We've called our kids our coworkers, and our coworker has been hilarious. So look for positive ways to engage with your employees amid kind of the seriousness of what's going on.
And I think that can go even further. I saw Duncan McCubbin, one of the callers here, and a friend of mine. Hello, Duncan, over in the UK, had mentioned that humor should not be lost in the appropriate level here too. So not only internally, but it's okay, given the right context, to use a little bit of humor in your external communications and marketing channels right now too. I think that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think a good example of someone who did that, McDonald's posted like an infographic or a picture of washing your hands to the McDonald's jingle, right? Just adding a little bit of humor that was on brand for them.
Yeah, there's some hit or misses out there, but the hits really definitely stand out when you see them, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of questions coming in more or less around kind of more specifically talking about B2B side of the business and how to react, because that is very different than necessarily communicating directly with your consumers or dealing with consumer shutdowns. What advice can you generally offer for how B2B businesses should be reacting?
I can go first. I think on the tourism side, I think right now, and this I think is going to change as time goes on, but right now I would say once a week is enough. It's still such an ever-changing landscape, and situations are changing, as we mentioned, by the minute, if not the hour and the day. And so I wouldn't tax yourself anymore. I would give yourself that 7-day window to sort of collect, and gather the most pertinent information, or come up with, the best content ideas that you have, over that 7-day period, and then put them together and hit go. I think trying to do anything more than that right now, in my opinion, is too much, and perhaps we might get to a point where even less is needed than that. But that's just my 2 cents. Love to hear what the others think.
Jim, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's tough to say, categorically for what B2B should be doing as opposed to kind of just generally speaking, any company in an industry, frankly. I think you need to follow the same steps. You need to gather the information that you have and assess the channels that you have to use. Knowing what channels are effective for what kinds of communications is very critical. And also assess your workplace risk as well. So again, it comes down to like, what's your work style? Is this a centralized? Is it a distributed workforce? You need to handle those kinds of conversations very differently. Those kind of communications very differently, depending on how you're structured. Again, I think it comes down to communicating openly, communicating honestly, and communicating frequently.
Fabulous. Jen, I think this one kind of hits.
I know that that's very broad advice. And anybody here who would like to get more specific, feel free to contact me at jim.prosser@edelman.com.
Perfect. I think this is kind of really in your wheelhouse, Jen. What is your advice on kind of email and advertising campaigns right now? If you had to pause them, how do you get them back up? If you continue to run them, how do you adjust?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think, again, it depends on your offer. At the end of the day, I would say you need to look at what's the impact to your company, regardless, even B2B, B2C. In this world, right now it's about smart action first, and then marry it with smart communication. So be careful with email. I guarantee everybody on this call has probably gotten a million updates about what their brand is doing, and that's important. And I've written some of those, and but so they're very important. And consumers do want to know, and they do want to feel comforted. But there is a cadence here where I think everybody has gotten a little drowned out by that. But back to the point. Does your offer meet the current demand of the marketplace? So if you're emailing about free delivery, yeah, I think that makes sense. If you're posting about that, that makes sense. If you are encouraging folks to go out and buy a car, that probably doesn't make sense. So I know we've said it's hard because it depends on the offer, but it really does. I would just continue to ask is this what people want right now? And if you're unsure, don't hesitate to test your own friend group. I do that too, because I think as communicators, we sometimes can get stuck in our world. We sometimes, if you've worked on a brand for a long time, I've been really blessed to do that. Sometimes I get so ingrained with the brand, it's almost like I'm working at their company. And so it's important to ask your coworkers, ask people who don't work on the account, is this a message you want to hear right now?
Yeah. Just kind of a follow-on. Go ahead.
I wanted to raise, I saw a really good question in the Q&A about, hey, my inbox is inundated with messages from businesses, that I patronize, and about what they're doing with their response to COVID-19. Like, is there a point in doing so as a brand, or are we just adding to the noise? And the viewpoint I would offer here is it's important to do, maybe not just because of, how to explain what you're doing with your facilities. If you're a retail, for instance, explaining like what's happening with your storefronts, are they open? Are they available? Are they, and in what state they're available? But one thing I really want to emphasize here from the corporate relations and reputation side is labor. So consumers want to know that particularly consumers, but also B2B too, they want to know that the businesses that they're using and that they're patronizing and their dollars are going toward are treating their employees right. And so some of this is about, the means through which they consume or are, present in your locations. But some of this is also just about expressing your values, right? So making sure that you're telling folks that here's what we're doing for our employees at this time. Here's what we're making sure they're taken care of. Those things will be remembered through this crisis, and they will be remembered after this crisis is over. And that's how you build brand. That's how you build reputation. And I would not underemphasize the degree to which people want to know that other people in this situation are being taken care of.
Yeah, that's fabulous advice and the exact direction I was going. So thanks, Jim. We've got a bunch going in here specifically around travel and tourism. So it appears we've got a pretty strong contingency in the audience here. So one of the things that is coming up consistently is, suggestions on how to, specifically on social content or promotional content for the travel industry. How do you inspire travel without a call for action when there's a known delay? And, how do you address that, Scott?
Yeah, I think, I don't think you need the call to action right now. I think if you, like we mentioned before, if you just take a look at, some of your best assets that you have, and if you, use a nice, outdoor scenic shot, for example, and have like a positive message with it, about, getting through this, or if you want to make it more engaging, maybe you do a poll, what event, in our community are you most looking forward to going to, once you're allowed, or, are you planning to make, spring break into fall break? What are you looking most forward to? Where do you want to travel? Where do you want to go? Things like that. Having some little online polls where you can sort of engage with people more, is also a way to sort of keep the conversation going, because even though from a travel perspective, nobody is planning anything right now, it does not mean that they're not clamoring, to figure out where their next trip is going to be. So there is an opportunity there right now, even though we can't make that hard ask or the hard sale, to sort of stay inspirational and stay in top of mind, when that decision can be made, at a later date. So, and lifting up those stories of what you're doing to support your employees, like we've already mentioned for other sectors, I think is really important right now too. It's a way to win over some more, visitors to your attraction or your hotel or your restaurant, or your destination. So as we've already mentioned for the other sectors, equally as important in travel and tourism and hospitality right now to talk about some of the positives going on and how people are trying to help one another out, and keep people off of the unemployment line.
Yeah, great advice.
One of the things I've loved just from a travel perspective, and also as a parent, is seeing some of the museums and other destinations providing kind of free tours virtually. Has been really neat to see. Maybe not everybody has that budget. I've also seen our local zoo popped up a live feed of some of the animals, and that's been getting a lot of traction. So get creative when you can.
And behind the scenes tours, could be of interest right now too, right? I mean, especially for the attractions that, that are shut down. Here's a chance to show people how the magic happens, behind the scenes, and let them in on some things that normally a guest experience maybe wouldn't include.
Love that.
Moving on to another industry. This one's kind of in the realm of everyone because it touches everyone. But for nonprofits and NGOs, they're dependent on donations, and how do you balance asking for money for your livelihood to maintain, keep going, and not coming across tone deaf at this point in time?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'll take some of that. So for context, I actually led communications for a global health NGO during the financial crisis. So this is something that speaks intimately to my experience and something I've gone through, although not in this direct health context. What I'd say there is, people are actually looking more than they ever have been, or more than they might usually be right now, for ways to support vulnerable communities. And frankly, I think one of the challenges that we have in the corporate community here in the United States is that there's not kind of one go-to entity to funnel resources to, which is, a challenge. There's no kind of easy way to feel like you're supporting the relief effort writ large. So given that, there's going to be a variety of ways that corporates and also individual donors approach their philanthropy here. So it is, I think, by no means inappropriate on its face to do fundraising and solicitations, but it does need to be couched in and acknowledge the reality of the situation. So for instance, if you're a nonprofit, let's say and you do music education for kids in high school, right? You are going, you're probably not able to offer services in large parts of the country at the moment. Sitting here in California, nobody's in school. So for you, it might be about, hey, we need to be there for kids when they do get back to school, acknowledging that they aren't right now, but that the continuing presence of and continuing work of this group doesn't stop because of the virus, and that it's now more than ever, it's critical to support these groups. So this very context specific, and I really say like all of these questions are, if there were a silver bullet, we would publish it on Edelman.com, but there's really not. It's so context specific, not just about what industry you're in, who your customers are, where you are in the country. There's a lot of variables at play here. And that's, I think, where we as communicators really have to stick to our principles and our core values as companies.
That's great context. Just a quick reminder again, for the hashtag, if you are tweeting, it is COVID-19 comms. And there's a lot of questions around messaging coming in that I've seen as I'm going through these questions. There's, at what point does, this kind of goes out to everyone, because I think there's a different perspective on this from each one of you. But when you're looking at the saturation of all the mentions of COVID-19 and everything right now, how unnecessary is it, and when is it necessary to acknowledge it? And then how do you stand out from the crowd when you do have to use that? Jennifer, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, sorry, say that last part again, because you broke up for me.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just saying there's a lot of conversation about when you have to use COVID-19 as your in your content, right? And you have to be messaging about it. At what point does it become saturated and you shouldn't talk about it? And then how do you stand out when you do have to talk about it?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, when you do talk about it, you have to lead with care and concern. Whether it's this crisis or any other crisis, truly, in my opinion, the biggest predictor of reputational harm is the perception that you do not care. And so within any messaging, I think that needs to be the leading point, the ending point, the middle point. It needs to be shown many times. As far as saturation, if you have an update to share that's relevant, share it. I don't think you need to continue to chime into the conversation if you don't have updates from a business sense. So standing out from the crowd, something I noted a little bit early about creating kind of video news packages, but look to create really engaging content. I think video has been critical in our industry for a long time. And it's even more critical when there's a level of seriousness going on, right? It's much more personal. And so when you can use video, or maybe it's, we're looking at doing a Facebook Live with one of our clients' presidents and employees and consumers, that's very personal. Just look for different types of content that's going to have a higher touch point. I've seen higher education institutions, and I think it could go across a lot of companies doing teletown halls to answer questions. Maybe it's not appropriate to put on social media in a Facebook Live format, but you still want that high touch, personal communication. So how about a teletown hall? And so just really think through the different types of content that are going to break through the clutter. And if it's not, is it worth doing?
Yeah, we actually just held a teletown hall today. So I agree. That's a great idea.
Yeah, fabulous advice.
Hey, Brandon, I've seen a bunch of questions here about media relations and media outreach. I just saw a great one here from Sarah Record that I wanted to acknowledge. So what are media outlets doing differently during this time? Any thoughts on when it's okay to start external media outreach / back to business as usual? So for one thing, it's all hands on deck. for COVID-19. So if if you're a reporter, your beat either switched entirely to covering some other aspect of this outbreak and of this pandemic, or you're still on that beat, but you're covering it through the lens of COVID-19. So I think number one, be in touch with what it is they're focused on and what they're writing. Or what they're publishing at the very least, and you can do that through Twitter. You can do that, with conversations with them too. Like, be on top of your beat writers and know what directions they're getting pulled in by their editors. Second of all, the second part of this question, rather, thoughts on when it's okay to start external media outreach. You can continue to do external media outreach, but I think it needs to be couched within, what are the reporters that you work with interested in? What are the demands that are being placed on them right now as far as coverage, and just being relevant and useful, which is, really always the rule. It just kind of becomes 100x more important when they're getting pulled in so many different directions. And we don't really know when it's going to be back to business as usual. Anybody who's telling you that they know what the timeline of the response here and the recovery is going to be, it isn't shooting straight with you.
Those are really good points. Something that really encouraged me yesterday, anybody who gets the Harrows, which I'm sure a lot of you do, I started to see some requests for positive news stories. And so I'm hopeful that while this situation is going to go on for a long time, there are reporters out there, there are news organizations that also want to highlight some positive amid everything going on. So maybe you have an employee doing something wonderful in the community that you want to highlight. Or maybe there's this very sweet story that was always internal, but maybe it's a great time to share it externally. Think about those positive, just heartwarming, uplifting stories too that maybe your company has that you could share.
Great advice. So we're running up at the end of the time here. Wanted to say thank you to the fabulous engagement from the audience. We realized we didn't get a chance to get to all of your questions. There were several hundred that came through. We will repeat this next week. So we will have the same format, and we will repeat the same thing. We will be having follow-on content for some frequently asked questions that will get published, and this recording will be sent out to everyone who registered. Also wanted to thank the panelists, Jim, Jennifer, and Scott. Thank you so much for your time and for taking all of these questions. We really, really enjoyed the time.
Thanks.
So with that, thank you, everyone. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you everybody. And why don't we can all share kind of the best way to contact us. So the best way to get in touch with me is jim.prosser@edelman.com, or you can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm @JimProsser.
You could email me at speacock, SPEACOCK, like the bird, at visitrally.com. And my Twitter is Peacock and Fly.
And this is Jen Donahoe. You can reach me at jdonahoe, it's DONAHOE, @planetagency.com, and that's planet with an I. And I'm on Twitter at Jen_Donahoe.
And I'm Brendan O'Donovan, just brendan.o'donovan at cision.com, and Brendan O'Donovan is my Twitter handle. Thank you, everyone. Wonderful webinar. See you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.